Is Fire Emblem Engage good? Is it the worthy successor to the series that it should be? Or does it fall flat? And just so you know, in regards to spoilers, all of the gameplay footage shown in this video is taken from the first 2 hours of gameplay, albeit with some songs used from later points in the game, as well as probably some gameplay spoilers in what I talk about. And the only major spoilers in terms of the story, there will be their entire section later in the video, closer to the end, where I will give a separate spoiler warning for that. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Now, first up on the review here is something I actually normally tackle last, because this doesn't matter as much to me, but it's the visuals. I normally tackle them last because I would like a game to look nice, but I don't need it to look beautiful for me to love it. But oh my god, this is one of the best looking games on the Nintendo Switch. Genuinely, it looks gorgeous. It is probably the best looking game on the Switch. It is visually gorgeous. It doesn't have issues with things like pop-in. And the game's frame rate has ran perfectly consistently the whole time. And are my standards lowered because of Pokemon? Probably. But, like, genuinely, this is one of, if not the best looking games on the Nintendo Switch. At least on the 3D side of things. Like, genuinely, it's gorgeous. It is freaking beautiful, and I love it. In terms of character designs, I'm quite mixed. Some characters look really good, others look iffy. There aren't any I dislike the look of, like, there's none that I'm like, please get off the screen. And there are some that look really good. I think, overall, the designs of this cast are kind of in the middle for me. There are definitely Fire Emblem games that have better casts, better looking characters. It looks a lot better cast-wise than Three Houses. My problem with Three Houses is it's really samey since basically everyone looks the same because they're all wearing academy uniforms till the time skip. But I do like a lot of the designs for the characters in this game. Again, some of them not super happy with, but there aren't any I dislike, and I like all of the designs, at the bare minimum. There are some I really like, and some I couldn't care less for. But there are none I hate. And as for the soundtrack, I like a lot of the new songs, and the rearrangements and remixes of old songs used for the emblems when they're summoned is great. Genuinely, I love things like the new remix of Edge of Dawn used for Violet, or the new remix of Azura's song for Corrin. Did I just do vocal songs? Absolutely. But those instrumental remixes using new instruments sound amazing. Like, some of my biggest problems with the music is some of it is amazing, and you only get to hear it for like one map. Genuinely, I wish you would hear it more. Also, it has an adaptive soundtrack in battles, which means essentially the tracks will amp up in intensity during combat, but when you're on menus and commanding your units around the map, it will be more calm. Which is really cool. It's neat when games do that. I'm personally not a fan of that, but that's me personally. I know a lot of people like it, and I do think it's cool, but I'd kind of rather just hear the battle versions of all of these songs, because I like the higher intensity. With that covered, let's talk about gameplay. And boy, I was wrong. Now, what do I mean by I was wrong? Pre-release, I made a video called Fire Emblem Engage Worries, where I entailed my thoughts on a lot of the pre-release media and why I was worried about it. And I'm going to be talking about the stuff on the gameplay side. I did say that the actual, like, commanding your unit side of gameplay looked really cool. However, I was not optimistic on the emblems. Overall, the emblems are really fun to use, as instead of essentially being weird or over-cumbersome, they act more as augments to your units, granting them an extra few skills maybe allowing them to use weapon types they can't normally use, or that aren't really made for their build style. It's really fun because instead of essentially just going, here's a few other characters, you're augmenting your characters. You're not letting them switch between, oh, this is Alear and this is Marth. They have completely separate movesets, but you can only have one on the field at once, and you have a timer on Marth. No, it feels more like, this is Alear, they're getting some boosts to make them feel a bit more like Marth, but they're still independent, and they have some of these cool buffs that let them use some of Marth's iconic abilities. In fact, a lot of the actual emblems take gimmicks from their games and find a way to decentralize them and incorporate them into the gameplay. For example, once you inevitably get the Corrin emblem, you can actually use Dragon Veins, a mechanic that hasn't been seen since Fire Emblem Fates and made the map design a lot more interesting. Albeit it's nerfed and decentralized in this game, but it's still really cool to see something like that return. Now onto the gacha system, and wow, it's completely pointless. Like, you can do it and you'll get like +1 to a stat on your unit. It's more there for the units that you can't give emblems. And it is almost completely worthless. In fact, it's about as useful as collecting spirits in Smash if you never play with spirits. You're essentially just getting some PNGs of characters. And I'm completely chill with that. Plus, if you recall in my prior video, I said I could be bribed. But it really doesn't matter that much. Now, I'm going to proceed to talk more about the actual overworld turn-based gameplay. And it controls amazingly. Gauntlets were nerfed from 3 houses, which I think was a completely necessary evil because they were completely broken in 3 houses. So, I think it was a good nerf. And they buffed daggers, making them more useful, which is also a really good change because I generally found them as just kind of worse bow and arrows with melee combat, but you have access to things like mini bows. So their buffs, or more accurately, in the case for knives, more gimmick or focus, that being more on crits, works really nicely and makes them a lot more useful. And as I said prior, the emblems act more as augmentation for your units than replacement, or just a straight up buff. While there's usually reason to just use your emblem, there are some times where you don't want to. And other times where you actually have to debate what unit's worth taking the emblem. And overall, I think that works really well to make it a really fun and fluid combat system. In fact, when it comes to the actual commanding gameplay sections, one of my biggest complaints is, I'll be honest, my cursor kinda sometimes gets stuck on corners when moving units. Because, for clarification, your cursor is usually forced onto a grid. Except for when you're moving a unit between tiles, where then it's sort of a grid, but sort of a not grid. And 3 houses was a lot more lenient on this movement. And it is missing something that 3 houses had that I don't think anyone's complaining it's gone, because I don't think anyone used it. 3 houses had a zoom-in feature where you could control your units from more of a traditional third person, which, ironically enough, gave me Warriors vibes. Which is kind of ironic, because a few years later we got a Fire Emblem 3 Houses Warriors. So, that was kind of weird. But it's not in this game, but I really don't think anyone's gonna complain, because it was a neat feature for a few minutes, but it wasn't that useful, and honestly felt more just like, hey, look at what we can do. It's cool, right? In fact, speaking of things that are cool, I mentioned this previously, but being able to use gimmicks from older Fire Emblem games is really neat, even to a lesser degree, and I really like what all the emblems can do. They're all unique, even if they're the ones from the same games. Like, for example, Micaiah and Ike are very different. Hell, even ones that are generally considered similar to each other, like Lucina and Marth, have different roles. As well, while pair-up's still gone from Fates and Awakening, the emblem system sort of replaces it. However, the thing that really replaces it in my mind is backup units, and essentially, certain units can get a skill which allows them where, if they're in the vicinity of an attacking unit, to join in on the attack and chain attack into others. I've been able to get up to a chain attack of 6 before doubling with attacks myself, essentially allowing for 8 consecutive hits in a row. The chain attack feature feels so fun to pull off, and I really love it. In fact, it is amazing, and I hope it returns. Because again, just having units combo off of each other is great. And lastly, I said in my prior video about what the game looked like pre-release, that it gave me Fire Emblem Heroes vibes at a few points. And it still does, in the best way possible. It took some of my favorite things from Heroes when I played it, and finally put them into the mainline games. For example, we finally have access to a reposition, which will worsen this despite not being nerfed at all, just nerfed by proxy if the maps are bigger. I'm still so happy to have it. Basically, they just took some skills from Heroes, and generally the skills they took over were ones I really liked and were fan favorites. Essentially, while it's nothing impressive or amazing, what they did take from Faye were generally the few bits that honestly do hold up and were good in essentially the Gotcha spin-off. Also, they took Tempest Trials. I haven't had a chance to check them out myself, as I've been focusing on the main story mostly, but they're there, which honestly surprised me to see them return. Too Long Didn't Watch. The overall gameplay is fantastic, and while they took some things from Heroes, the things they did take were some of the only parts of the game I actually look upon fondly, now that I've stopped playing it. Except the summoning system, I still don't like it. Yes, I know it's basically completely optional and does almost absolutely nothing, but I still would have preferred it to not be there. Nothing else in this video is non-spoilery, so if you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. Now, we're going to talk about the story. I was also going to address characters, but I decided not to because it didn't make for that interesting of a section. And I'm going to basically keep it up till the end of Chapter 11. So basically, if you can enter Chapter 12, you're good. Alright. Are you done yet? Because again, if you don't want to get spoiled, I recommend clicking on. Well, in that case, we're going to start with a gameplay spoiler I really didn't want to mention, but Chapter 11 is freaking amazing. I love how it strips away every single thing from your characters. You don't have access to emblems, you don't even have access to the time stone, which means you can't reverse your action. You're essentially forced into a game with none of the gimmicks meant to give you an upper hand, and that is amazing. Both the fact you don't have those gimmicks, and the fact that it genuinely makes the characters feel powerless right when they're supposed to in the story. It genuinely adds so much impact to that entire moment and scene just because they did that. And in terms of the actual story itself, I actually get Fate's vibes, like, quite heavily. And by Fate's vibes, I mean the story reminds me a lot of Fate's. Vale and Sombron remind me of Lilith and Anakos. The gameplay being fantastic with, I'll be honest, a kind of lackluster story that's quite predictable. This feels very similar to Fate's, which is a good thing. Because Fate's gameplay-wise is one of my favorite games in the series, if not my favorite. It lacks in the story. So essentially, you're taking the greatest parts about Fates and just doing them again. Which I'm fine with, because I love Fates' gameplay, and this is very similar to Fates. So, in that regard, it's really good. It's really fun. What are your thoughts on Fire Emblem Engage? I really enjoyed them. Let me know in the comment section down below. I'll see you guys in the next one.